my students. Today, again, in this short video, we should be talking about chapter 7, 8, and 9 of part 2 from the novel To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Let us enter into it and see what these chapters say. As you know, we are in the second part, and chapter 7 begins again with the kind of situation in which the house where the Ramses used to stay that was silent, that was still, and only one maid servant, Mrs. McNabb, she was coming and going for the sake of dusting, cleaning, etc. She was sent money by them, and that is why she continued to do her work. And perhaps the hope was also present that somehow these people will return. But they have not returned still. And the house gives the situation that is really not good. It seems to be uninteresting and boring. For example, this chapter opens with the line night after night, summer and winter, the torment storms, the arrow like stillness of wine, from the upper rooms of empty house, only gigantic chaos, streaked with lightning, could have been heard, tumbling and tossing as the winds and waves disported themselves like the amorous bulk of leviathans whose brows are pierced by no light of reason, and mounted one on top of other, and lunged and plunged in the darkness of the daylight. For this day, month, year ran shapelessly together in idiot games until it seemed as if the universe were battling and tumbling in brute confusion and wanton lust aimlessly by itself. So the students, you can see that the writer is presenting to us a picture in which nature is doing its job as it wants to do. For example, summers come, winters come, storms come, rain comes, and the dryness comes, and other things do come. Plants keep on moving, everything keeps on moving, and only one thing is not happening, that house in which the Ramses used to live is not being populated. So that can be taken the observation of Miss McNabb, but really these are the observations of the writer. Writer is pondering upon, thinking upon the situation of nature, how it is going on, and how it is behaving. She actually wants to say that people are important. They create a color of life, but then even if the people are absent, the nature has got its own role to continue with that. So in this sense, the chapter 7 begins and it ends also in the same sense. So let us see what we have in chapter 8. Chapter 8 begins with the first these lines. Let us have a little bit of reading. Thinking no harm for the family wouldn't come, never again. Some said, and the house would be sold at Michaelmas perhaps. Mrs. McNabb stooped and picked a bunch of flowers to take home with her. She laid them on the table while she dusted. She was fond of flowers. It was a pity to let them waste. Now, the same thing is repeated once again in the start of this chapter 8 also. Mrs. McNabb has been listening from the people that the people or the dwellers of that house have gone and they are not going to return, and that is why the possibility is that the house may be sold on the event of Michaelmas. And then this thing goes to create a kind of sadness in her mind that the people won't be returning back. And however, she shows her interest in the flowers. She picks some of the flowers and takes them out and puts them on table. And as a result, it means that she didn't like the wastage of the flowers. This wastage of the flowers on the one hand and capturing of the flowers, keeping them safe, on the one hand goes to show Mrs. McNabb's interest in them and how she wanted to take care of them. But then on the other hand also, we can say that human beings, the good human beings, are also like the flowers which Mrs. McNabb never thought that they should disappear, they should die, they should not meet, they should not come. So she wanted to take care of all these things. So that is the way how once again the stillness, the sadness of the house is being pointed out, which is right now without the human being. The presence of human being and their things what they possess are also looked at by Mrs. McNabb. For example, Mrs. McNabb looks at some of the articles which are left there and the things which Mrs. Ramsay used to use. For example, if we just look at these green lines, we will be able to have a view of this thing. But people should come themselves, they should have sent somebody down to see, for there were clothes in the cupboard, they had left clothes in all the bedrooms. What was she to do with them? They had the moths in them. Mrs. Ramsay thinks, poor lady. She would never want them again. She was dead, they said. Years ago in London, there was the old grey cloak she was gardening. She could see her as she came up with the drive, with the washing stooping over her flowers. The garden was a pitiful sight now, all run to riot and rabbits scuttling at you out of the bed. She could see her with one of the children by her side in that grey cloak. So, what is happening here in these lines? We can see that Mrs. McNabb is noticing some of the articles and things of the people who used to stay there. For example, their clothes in the cupboard, their articles on the boards, these things she is noticing. And she is feeling too sad and thinking why the people didn't come. They should have sent them her a message. And all of a sudden, her thought turns towards Mrs. Ramsay, and the writer reminds the reader that again the death of Mrs. Ramsay has taken place, but things which he used are still there. And these things are lying on the table, these things are lying here and there. Things are there put in such a way Mrs. McNabb thinks as perhaps she thought she would return. But she cannot because she's dead, the information is given to us. However, Mrs. McNabb has a view, the mental view of Mrs. Ramsay when she saw her working in the plots, in the grass, wearing her grey cloak and having the small child with her. She observed her and she found her very pleasant as well. So the memory of Mrs. Ramsay is being repeated in the mind of Mrs. McNabb, and the game of the modern writers that they keep on reminding the reader by thinking about the memory lane, what was happening in the past, and how it could affect in the future. That is all they are doing, and the same is being done by the writer here. That Mrs. McNabb, in her mind, is visualizing the presence of Mrs. Ramsay, how she looked and how she would do that, and the things are present here. For example, her handkerchief, her dressing table drawers, and her money, and all these things are present there. And this she feels and looks at them, the boots and the shoes, and feels as if she would just come, but she cannot come. So the things remain the same, and the and nature remains the same, but the human beings disappear. They come and go. Same thing is repeated by Mrs. McNabb here. Mrs. McNabb remembers another quality of Mrs. Ramsay, that all the time she would say, "Good evening, Miss Ramsay." She was good to her. And then Mrs. McNabb continues to talk about some of the disappearances as the disappearance of Mrs. Ramsay was. For example, Mr. Andrew killed and Miss Brooke dead too, they said, with her first baby, etc., etc. So the role of death in the life of the human being, that the things in the articles, the houses, and the other people are left behind, but a few of the human beings would die very soon. That is the indication given in this part of the chapter. We know that there are other people also. For example, the kitchen maid servant, she also used to come with Miss McNabb and make food for them. And she had red hair, possibly the name was Mildred or Marian, etc. Mrs. McNabb remembers, but she cannot remember exactly. And same is the case with the rats, which are coming and going inside the rooms, and the rabbits outside. All these things are going on, and sometimes she would like to dust the things, and she would like to, see things, but she was bored and upset because the people were not coming, and that is why once again she goes outside and the house is left alone, and she goes back to her home. So this is Miss McNabb only who's the person who comes on. That is why the chapter 9 begins with this line: the house was left, the house was deserted. So that is the condition of the house. Yes, it is the point of view of the writer that it is the human being who make any building, who make the building beautiful, colorful, full of voices, full of things, and the life keeps on going on. In the absence of the human being, life is like that. But actually, we are being given the situation of the house also. In the absence of Mr. Ramsay, she used to be full of life. She used to be the person who made the other people full of life. But here, the house is deserted, the house is left alone. With this kind of thing, the lesson or the chapter begins. The same thing is repeated differently in other lines also. For example, toads had nosed their way in idly, aimlessly, and many other plants had grown. Tortoise shells were there, poppies soared and they are grown. The plants like dahlias, cabbages, all these things are happening. but there is nobody to take care of them except Mrs. McNabb. Miss McNabb dreamed of a lady, of a child, of a plate of milk soup, if it had ever, over the walls like a spot of sunlight and vanished. These things also Mrs. McNabb thinks about in her vision. But then she connects this vision with the reality also. For example, these underlined lines, look at them. Only the lighthouse beam entered the rooms for a moment, sent a sudden stare over bed and wall in the darkness of winter, looked with equanimity at the thistle and the swallow, the rat and the straw. So another reality besides the home which was existing, and even if the human beings are not present, the lighthouse is existing. And we are reminded about the lighthouse because the title is that, and the journey is to be taken towards the lighthouse, and that is why the reminder has come once again. The light of the lighthouse comes into the rooms for a moment, then disappears because it's revolving all the time, and this goes to show that perhaps the light is also in search of the human being where they had gone. That is why it looks at the empty rooms and it disappears as well. So that is the height of imagination of the writer, which he is using in order to remind us about two lighthouses. One, Mrs. Ramsay, and other lighthouse itself, which made the life of the people. But now, single handedly, they cannot make the life, and that is why human beings are awaited in this part of the chapter and the section. So Mrs. Bast was another person who used to help Miss McNabb in the work of the house. Mrs. McNabb's Bast stayed the corruption, the rot. They had been present, the writer wants to say, otherwise everybody had disappeared. George, who was the son of Mrs. Bast, regarded the rats and did different things. In the same way, there is the once more as she felt the tea warm in her, the telescope fitted itself to Mrs. McNabb's eyes, and in a ring of light she saw the old gentleman lean as a rake, wagging his head. So Miss McNabb is trying to find the people, looking here and there, looking into her imagination, but she is unable to find any. And therefore, in that way, the sadness of these two people can be attached to the sadness of the house, the loneliness of the house, in the absence of all these people. The house was existing like that. So a gap of long years, 10 years has passed, and ultimately the house is going to be populated once again by Lily Briscoe, first of all, and it is said about Carmichael that he would also come. So the house is going to be populated. Lily Briscoe returns, Carmichael returns, other people possibly might return, but the people who had gone, who had died, they may never return. So life keeps on going even if the people die, but the things become deserted, things become alone, and that is the impression of Mr. Ramsay also when he has lost his wife because of her death. And that is the situation which will be in the life of those people who loved Mrs. Ramsay. As the house is deserted, as the house is alone, same would be the case with the people like that. Chapter 10 also keeps on harping on the same thing, so that is why we are ignoring it. And next time it would be possible for the students to approach part 3 of the lighthouse. So that's it from me for this day. Hopefully, you have acquainted yourself with the lighthouse, with Miss Ramsay, with Miss McNabb, and you have also come to know about the deserted house and loneliness of the house in the absence of the human being. So that was all for this day. Hope to see you in some next video. Thank you for watching, and if you understand something, do not fail to hit the like button as well as the subscribe button if you are not subscribed. So hope to see you in some other video.